Thank you, May, and thank you for organizing. Welcome to everybody. Maybe as people are joining in, maybe it was a little early today than expected, but welcome to the people and the note takers. I see some note takers have joined ahead of the people themselves. So, hey, welcome to the note takers too. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about enterprise AI agents. We're gonna learn about what's going on in the industry, not so specifically from the point of view of an engineer's workflow, but more generically an enterprise AI agents, and see how the landscape is evolving. And I'm also going to deep dive into one aspect of enterprise agents, specifically from the finance vertical, to show you a little bit about what's actually going on in use cases where you require certain types of specific expertise. All right, without that, let's jump right in. Right, a little bit about myself. I am an ex-Googler. I was at Google from 2014 to 2019, spending most of my time in what's called Daydream, or what was called Daydream, which is basically AR, VR, right? Some of the coolest stuff that you remember, cardboard demo, that was the birth of the Google AR, VR project, which eventually ended up doing some cool things. And some of that continues that DNA continues in other companies, including Google itself, right? But since then, I've been mentoring a lot of startups. I went on to work in autonomous driving with the computer vision stack, focusing on real-time framework at Apex AI, where I was VP of product. And along the course, I've also taught enterprise AI agents at Stanford University. I had a course called the Stanford Continuing Studies Program. I've also worked in cybersecurity, working on AI agents for cybersecurity. So I've done quite a few things since Google, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you might have in any of those topics. But just to get us warmed up a little bit about enterprise AI and where this is going, I have a couple of warm-up questions. I wanted to make this a poll, but I didn't have time to do that. So I'm going to let you put your answers in chat, if you would, right? Or just voice it out. First question: how many tokens did Microsoft process in Q1 2025? Right, and by tokens I mean tokens as defined by language model tokens, right? Roughly a word is a token if you want to approximate. Any answers? Let me see. I'll give you a few seconds if anybody wants to answer in the chat. All right, we have 10 trillion and 100 trillion are the two answers I see. Okay, I'm gonna give you the answer. It is actually 100 trillion. All right, so Microsoft actually processed 100 trillion tokens. Right, a gargantuan number. Right, think of this as like compared to what Bing did in the search days. This is way bigger, and that's really why you can see the amount of explosion in infrastructure and everything else around AI. Another warm-up question I have for you, specifically around enterprise AI in the US as of 2025. This also comes from a survey, by the way, or from a report I think this one is from Anthropic. But what percentage of employees report using AI at work? And your choices are 10%, 40%, 75%, and 90%. I'm gonna give you, there's a couple of answers coming in, or one answer, 75% from Rob. All right, a couple of folks said 40%. All right, the right answer is actually 40%. Very cool for those who said 40%. It's maybe a little bit lower than you might have thought. But it's actually, given that this is where we are in terms of using AI at work, where we are in the tech cycle, 40% is I think a very decent number. But it also shows you the amount of opportunity there is for AI to penetrate all aspects of the enterprise. Because, well, clearly majority of the enterprise users don't actually use AI at work, which obviously means that there's a lot of room there for all the agentic AI that we're going to see in enterprise workflows. And that's kind of forms the basis of some of what we're going to talk about a little bit later in this talk. It reminds me, this statistic sort of reminds me of the early days of the internet, like, where how many people actually use the internet or Google at work. Back in 2000, it was probably somewhat similar, right? People did not really use the internet for their work. It was nothing that was there. There was a lot of information there, but it wasn't really useful, and it wasn't a daily use tool. But today, I can hardly imagine that number being anywhere less than 95%, if that. And I think this case will be similar with AI. I think we will see AI enterprise usage go very rapidly, and not 10 or 20 years. I think in 1 or 2 years, we will be somewhere north of 75%, if not closer to 90%, I think, in terms of using AI at work. The question is, what are people going to be using AI at work for? And this is what we're going to talk about now in terms of enterprise AI agents. Now, here's enterprises are complex. They have tons of workflows, tons of employees, lots of specialization. In the next 3 slides, I'm going to show you some examples, and these come from, by the way, Foundation Capital, which is a VC firm that has put together a list not only of enterprise workflows and enterprise startups or enterprise use cases, but startups both within and outside their portfolio, which are addressing the opportunity of agentic AI within these workflows. So if you look a little bit closely there, you'll see some common things. This is, by the way, page 1 of 3. So these are not the entire enterprise workflow out there. But sales and marketing, recruiting, engineering, security, and operations, clear use cases for automating with AI. And that's really where we're going. You might have heard of some of these names already. If not, you will be hearing of that soon. If you're not among the 40% who are already using AI at work, you will probably be soon using these. And if you're not using the Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT, chances are you will soon also be encountering one of these startups in your specialization, trying to automate and augment the workflows that you're working on. Now, some of these startups are already well on their way and raised a ton of money and are unicorns already, but there's lots of them that are really small as well, right? And good examples. There are good examples in each of these. These examples, by the way, are not specifically chosen for their adoption or their traction. I think they're basically chosen as representative examples, and you can keep that in mind because there might be examples that are outside of these that are also doing well. The other point to note is not all of these are startups that were AI first, like Eightfold AI, I'm sure has been around from before language model days. Contrast that with Sierra, which, by the way, is another ex-Googler founded startup, which is in the customer's operations section here, right at the bottom. And they are only, I think, a year or 2 old and already raised a ton of money, right? And so these are all good examples. And in smaller font there, you'll see the various actual workflows that they are trying to automate. Now, if you take recruiting as an example, talent acquisition and sourcing or talent acquired sourcer are examples of job descriptions or workflows that these companies are trying to automate, right? And that's really the opportunity that they're going after. Let me pause there to see if there's any questions. Well, if you have any questions, feel free to either drop them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask. Happy to answer. Now, going along, there's a ton more here: legal, supply chain, logistics, healthcare, financial services, insurance. And by the way, some of these are not necessarily in-house enterprise workflows. A lot of them might also be outsourced or external verticals themselves. This inventory of startups obviously is considering all of those. And finally, the third section of this is ITs and business process services. Traditionally been more of an outsourced function, but there's a lot of in-house people too and in-house workflows. And of course, when it comes to IT support and automation, the existing incumbents are also there, very much like companies like, for example, ServiceNow, have also gone deep into agents and deploying their own agents that can not only automate their workflows, but also automate workflows that somehow touch their product in one way or the other. So a ton of startups here and lots going on. So how do we actually decompose this or deconstruct this a little bit to understand, right? So I dug deep into all of these startups, the 50 startups that I mentioned here, and looked at the number of employees at each of these startups, right? And the reason for that is that that gives us a signal of the startup maturity. And if you go into that, what you'll notice is that there is if you look at the average number of employees per startup, you'll see companies like legal and sales and marketing, these startups are much bigger, much more mature, even if they're somewhat young. And that I find that interesting. And I put that down, if you look at it carefully, I put it down to a correlation between what I consider as natural language workflows in that particular job function, right? And clearly, sales and marketing workflows and legal workflows have heavy dependency on natural language, a lot of either document-based, email-based, or messages back and forth between people to get to a common understanding. These are clearly use cases that language models thrive on, and they are able to summarize, they're able to find logical consistencies, inconsistencies, and answer questions based on a database or a knowledge base of these things that, and they're also well understood workflows for the most part. So put all that together, I think it's clear why legal, sales and marketing, and recruiting for that matter, are also coming up to the top in terms of startup maturity. And startup maturity to me is also a proxy for adoption in the wider sense, because I think these startups are able to hire because they are seeing traction, and they are seeing traction because they are seeing adoption in enterprises. And I think these are the verticals where you'll see the fastest growing and the fastest adoption. And the slowest, I think, are further down also, where you supply chain and the financial services and logistics, where maybe these are slightly, it's also possible they're slightly smaller in terms of dollar spend, although at a macro level, each of these functions are equally big. They're like $1 trillion in terms of enterprise corporate spend, in terms of tools and employees. And these agentic startups are addressing both tools and employees, by the way, in terms of their what they're going after in their market. And clearly, those are also going to be automated. They just require a lot more understanding of the specific workflows, the specific nuances, and then engineering your language-based system to be able to understand that workflow and to automate it more, right? So that's kind of why I think even though you're not seeing those kind of startups raising a lot of money and automating a lot of workflows yet, I think those are coming to an end. And I think in a couple of years' time, we will be seeing a lot more of those, a lot bigger in terms of startups. Okay, so now that we've seen a lot of what startups are doing in enterprises and how they're dealing with enterprise workflows, let's take a little dive into what a recent publication from the Anthropic, what's called the Anthropic Economic Index Report, showed us. The first is that delegation or high autonomy is the goal. What the survey found was that 77%, and this is basically based on Anthropic's or Claude use cases that they have found, Claude Agent and Claude Code included, that 77% of business use cases involve automation usage patterns, specifically or especially targeting full task delegation. What that means is what users really want to do in enterprises is to give a high-level task to Anthropic in this case, but it applies to any agent. And that high-level task should be autonomously completed by this AI agent. So in other words, rather than just ask a simple question of summarize this email for me, the task would be more like, well, find out what that information is email is asking for, find the information, and cross-check it with somebody else, and then reply to it. Right? This is the kind of task that you would do and you would want your AI agent to do. Now, if you don't, now this is clearly a much more difficult task than just tell me what's in the email, but that is really where the value proposition is, and that's what users are trying to do, right? And that's what AI agents are trying to do as well, is to not just understand, but to complete a task. And secondly, when you want to complete a task, you need context, right? And that context is often the most difficult thing. Context comes not only from what's in that particular email in this example, context comes from everything else in terms of your data that you are dealing with in your enterprise. As a simple question in an email might require you to go find different pieces of data from different enterprise systems in order to reply to that. And that is the context that I'm talking about. And that context is hard to get because these context is multidimensional in terms of types of data. It's multimodal sometimes. You may have not just text data, but you will have databases, you will have tables, columns, numbers, charts. You might have visual data in case that requires looking at images and videos in order to find the answer, and then composing that answer. So all of this context is extremely difficult to put together, but that is really where the agentic AI world is going. And we'll see some examples of how context can actually be presented and how this can actually be trained. And today we're entering an era of what's called context engineering. I think we're just starting to see that as a bigger umbrella to what used to be called prompt engineering. I think context is going to be the new frontier of how do we define the right context for AI. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. Let's move on. Right. So the emerging trend that all of this is pointing to, by the way, when you want high automation and high context, is that right now there is a simple agentic workflow is not going to be enough, and you need some kind of governance around it. And the reason for that is because high autonomy obviously means that you're allowing the AI to make decisions on its own, and there's always the danger of the AI making a mistake, and that's the basic idea behind why you need guardrails. But these guardrails come in two parts, right? Or two types. One is the data governance guardrails, which is the agent getting the right data at the right time, or is it respecting the data authentication or access rules that the enterprise has put in place? And on this other side, the human oversight is to actually see if the AI is respecting the contextual enterprise rules and regulations about what is appropriate, what is safe. For example, brand and brand voice in the case of a marketing agent, or something about how you can it's respecting the particular access rules or norms that the enterprise has in place for answering human questions as part of the workflow, right? And so both of these guardrails are programmatically provided as part of the context that I just talked about, in order for that agent, complex autonomous agent, to be actually useful. And that's what we're going into. Okay, now I'm going to take a step back and go into a vertical specific example. And this comes from a startup that has actually been working in the space for a few months. It's not one of the startups that we saw just mentioned in the Foundation Capital list of startups. It's a different one. It is based on, it's actually targeting a lending industry, a subsector of the financial services sector, but specifically looking at companies that have to do loan processing of one form or the other. There are two types of use cases here. We can broadly make this enterprise use case into internal and customer facing. A lot of internal workflows in this financial industry or insurance loan and credit industry is focused around customer research, inquiry processing, account opening, know your customer, and money laundering regulation, and high volume processes like data entry and claims processing and policy management. All of these are actually significantly automated already, right? And so there are forms and there are standard ways in which these things are scaled. And because they are highly automated already using SaaS tools for the most part, it means that an agentic system can very easily be adopted to follow these workflows and complete these workflows in a equally deterministic way, which also means that there's not a huge return on investment from making it highly agentic if you're sticking with these workflows. Where it becomes more interesting is in the customer facing area, where it's slightly less deterministic in terms of workflows. There's a lot more natural language interactions. And examples for those are customer facing loan processing requirements like changing payment terms, refinancing, or repossession of a collateral in case of the loan is not being paid. And so those are the kind of agentic opportunities that exist in this space. Now, by the way, there are two kind of modes and directions to keep in mind when you're talking about a customer-facing agent. You can have chat or telephone. The simple difference there is that chat is purely text, whereas telephony is voice-based. And secondly, you have inbound versus outbound interaction. Inbound is fielding calls, the typical customer support agent type of experience. Outbound is a lot more difficult because outbound is you as a sales agent or a marketing or a business development representative have to make an outbound call to somebody you don't know, is aware of who you are or what company you represent and what products you're trying to sell, right? So that makes it a lot more difficult. And so in this 2x2, obviously the easiest is the inbound chat, but we're rapidly going into agents that have to be able to handle more voice-based outbound calls as well. The difference between chat and telephony is actually fairly small because text to speech basically makes the two of them equivalent. The only downside is in the case of telephony, it is extremely latency sensitive. So if you ask a question and you don't get an answer within a couple of seconds, the user thinks something is going wrong, right? So that introduces a level of difficulty in the engineering side because you cannot use a very large language model, because hooking that up into the system in a real-time conversation can lead to very long delays. And so you have to have a bunch of simple steps and handle that in a sort of a cascading way of agents. And we'll see that in a second. By the way, I wanted to just remember here, there was a Google demo from 2018 that that showed how a voice-based agent can make a restaurant reservation on your behalf, speaking to an actual restaurant. And this was a demo I remember from TGIF. And then I think this was actually a Google I/O demo where they showed making a hair salon reservation. And they actually played this from an actual call where your agent, which was branded as Duplex, by the way, agent, would go and make a reservation for you. And the real human being on the other side didn't even realize that there was an agent speaking, right? And then it got into a little problem there. There was a branding issue and user experience. What if the user doesn't actually know that this is a agent on the other side? Is it actually okay? Is it ethical? Is it, how should the agent make it known that it's actually an agent? And for many reasons, like a lot of things at Google, it was great technology and didn't end up becoming mainstream, which is still puzzling to a lot of people like me who were at Google at that time and saw products that were years ahead of its time demoed, and then nothing really came out of it in terms of like actual product traction and adoption. And I think this Google Duplex was eventually absorbed and put into other Google Assistant, which then morphed into other use cases and other areas and focused on the Pixel phone. And then with Gemini in the back end, we're still working on different things. I'm sure Google is working on different things in this world still, right, with Gemini nowadays. Okay, pause here. I'm just going to see if there's any other questions. Right. Arun, go ahead. I see you. Raise your hand. Do I need to unmute? Hold on a second. All right, sorry, you were not able to unmute. I don't think. Turns out I cannot unmute you either. All right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to add you as a co-host because I don't know a better way to unmute you other than May, if you know how to unmute Arun. All right, since it's not a very large group, I'm going to go ahead and make Arun the co-host. Arun, see if you can.
Thanks, thanks, Sanjay. Thanks for doing this. I had a question actually. So, you mentioned about how in companies there are certain processes that are actually being AI agent enabled. One question is, one of the things I've heard is, companies care about sort of deterministic outcomes, and in terms of making sure that that it doesn't kind of, in at least even in 1 or 2% of the cases, it doesn't hallucinate and do something which will damage either the reputation of the company or its outcome that it proposes, which is not aligned. So, what is being done to address that part, or is that being factored in terms of only allowing AI agents for certain use cases where they have more control over?
Yeah, good question. I mean, this is the question of the day when it comes to, how are we gonna put those guardrails, right? But the short answer to your question is, if it is um, highly damaging in one way or the other, then the accuracy bar goes much, much higher. Today, in my opinion, we're automating workflows where something like 85 to 90% accuracy is good enough, and that's a small number of workflows. And that's the reason why we have human oversight, in the sense that there's a lot of assistive workflows agents and not actual autonomy. And what I mean by that is the agent proposes an actual change, and the human has to accept it. And so we are in the stage where we are still figuring out whether 99% accuracy is the right bar, and are we willing to live with a lower bar. In my experience from the autonomous driving industry, where an accident is catastrophic, and the AI, for example, fails to detect a stop sign 1 in 1,000 times, it's still bad news, and it's not acceptable. And there were lots of guardrails around those kind of things. But the typical enterprise workflow is a lot more forgiving, and it varies by vertical. And you can see the example, like in the previous example that we saw, clearly legal agent is galloping away, and they're seeing traction. Now, can you have Harvey or another legal agent draft an entire agreement and have it signed and not look at it? My guess is no. Somebody has to eventually still read it. So does it save time and money? Yes. And does it cause? Does it can it make a mistake? I think the answer to that is also yes. So I don't have an answer to the question of, like, clearly every department in the enterprise is evaluating these agents, and each department has its own accuracy bars, and agents are all willing to, or all trying to meet those bars in one way or the other.
Okay, thanks. So in some sense, actually putting a human in the loop on a temporary basis until you get comfortable is one way to stage it to get to full automation. Is that sort of how?
Yeah, I think that's exactly how it's playing out. Rob, let me.
I think you can hear me, right?
Yes, I can.
I seem to unmute mine. I have a question. Going back to your guardrail slide, I know you probably studied this because I just from your understanding of it, but when I look at like data governance and I look at like say an LLM running an API from chat or X or whoever to write say a will, and we know the data goes back to, you know, the large language model. Where does that, like in terms of privacy, governance, is it better to even have on-prem small language models to do that kind of work? And my other second part of that question is, when I look at the compute values right now, how much things are costing to do these things, obviously going back to your token question, what's the value versus on-prem and off-prem in this hybrid cloud compute market?
Got it. Okay, two questions. The first one, data governance. I was focusing here on the enterprise's own data governance, which is to say the right people have access to the right data. There's a lot of enterprises who are uncomfortable with their data going to a language model simply for answering the question, right? And I actually believe that discomfort will go away over time, because a language model has to see the data to answer your question, and people will over time, I think, get more comfortable with, let's say, OpenAI's claim that they are not going to learn from your data and they're not going to use your data, in the same way that, you know, people got comfortable with enterprise sensitive data sitting in Google Cloud or AWS Cloud or one of the other clouds, right? That's the way I look at it. But the data governance model causing an on-prem type of AI or on-device AI still exists, and I think that will be forced in certain cases by regulations. So like HIPAA regulations or some other privacy regulations like GDPR or one of the other numerous ones that may actually require no third party to have access to that data under any circumstances. I think those will be the areas where this kind of data governance will kick in place. But when the enterprise is free to decide about how they want to safeguard their data, I think over time they will expose it. They will allow third-party language models running in the cloud to access it for those purposes. And for your other question about cost, yes, there have been several attempts to, you know, have small language models running on device or on-prem to keep the cost low. Here's what's happening: the industry is moving so fast, and the costs are coming down so fast that most agentic startups and enterprises and even bigger companies are focusing on how do we make it as reliable as possible. So in other words, even if it's too expensive to actually deploy in production, if we can get to a 95% accuracy for a complex workflow today, let's go grab that market, because I know the cost will come down by a factor of 2 to 10 in a year from now, right? So that's been the attitude. And so for that reason, using state-of-the-art model from, you know, OpenAI, GPT 4.0 or 4.0 mini is actually quite acceptable, even though in reality it's cost prohibitive at scale.
Thank you.
All right. So let me jump into this thing. We talked about a little bit about this finance workflow. So looking into that, you know, this is a workflow in lending that is customer facing. Inbound customer calls and says, hey, I have a new job or a new bank account or new income and I want new payment terms for my loan, right? And the decision workflow is heuristic driven. We don't want the AI here to make its own decision on whether this person, we can give them new payment terms because they have a new income or a new job, right? The AI has to replicate what a human does, and the human is given certain guidelines as to what they can and cannot do. They have to look at their payment to income ratio. They have to look at the particular customer's history, how often they've been paying their loans on time. And they have to also consider the loan product fit, which is basically to say that loan is a product with certain terms, and the company has different loan products, and this particular customer has to fit within those boundaries of that product. And there are some regulatory requirements as well. They may not be allowed to change payment terms during certain blackout periods. So all of this is what the human agent would do, and these are exactly what the AI agent also has to respect. Right? And finally, once the agent makes a decision, the updates have to be made both on the internal databases, which is specifically called a loan management system in this case. It could be a change of account information, change of user information, or change of payment schedule of the loan. And these updates have to be also sent out to the customer. So this is kind of an end-to-end workflow of a external-facing, customer-facing that is being automated by agents today, right? Or at least trying to be automated. And in the implementation here, just to give an example of what this startup has been working on, there is a two-step agent in the inbound call side where there is a low latency Llama 8B to make sure that there's a rapid response in determining what exactly the customer is asking. And then once that has been routed, once that has been routed to the second LLM, still doing voice to text and then analysis of the text, it uses GPT-4o with a 1.5-second response time to actually understand the nuances of what the customer is asking for. So the first stage is think of it more of as a filter to make sure that this is a real customer and to verify their account number and address. And the second stage is then to understand what the customer is actually asking for and how does it fit with the parameters that we have. The next step is a decision workflow, and that decision workflow is those heuristics that we just saw and what the human agent would do. And this has been implemented using reinforcement fine-tuning with GPT-04 Mini as the LLM underneath it. And this is a reasoning model, by the way, or what's called a reasoning model in the sense that it has enough reasoning capability to actually come up with good responses or good reasoning-based responses, again, within the guardrails that have been given. And finally, the updates have to be made, and those updates have to be made in certain systems. And those are handled also by GPT-4o Mini's function calling capability. And finally, drafting the communication back to the customer is using a GPT-4o agent. Right? Now, all of this has been implemented in the text field. The ability to do this in voice is a little bit in the future, at least for this company, simply because the voice latencies are not there yet for this workflow. Let me walk you through a few screenshots here. And now I don't know if you can see it, so I'm going to sort of read out the highlights of an actual conversation or a demo conversation with a customer. Customer calls up and asks, or chats and asks, what's my next payment? And the agent goes, after authentication and all that, goes and finds out and says, your payment, next payment is $252, currently overdue by 2 days. Would you like any assistance in making the payment? And the customer asks, what's my payoff amount as of July 31st? And the agent responds, says, I will go and calculate it, give me a moment. Comes back with your payoff amount on July 31st will be $1,813.77. The amount is valued until that date. Would you like to proceed making a payment, or do you need assistance? Customer says, never mind, can I make a small payment now? And the AI says, well, certainly, let me generate a link for you, because this is a fairly normal, if somebody says, I want to make a payment now, that's not something that's within the guidelines. So it's able to give a quick answer of what you can do. Gives a payment link, customer completes the payment, and then customer goes on to say something like, I won't be able to make any further payments on this loan. Now, there's a trickier question. In fact, it's not even a question, right? And so the agent thinks about it and says, okay, I understand you might be facing some difficulties. Let me see how I can assist you. Let's explore some payment options. And it takes a while and comes back and says, I found a repayment option that might help you manage your loan. and offers this option, which is in keeping, by the way, with the loan guidelines, and says, here's your revised loan amount, revised payment rate, revised monthly payment, and a one-time disbursement amount of $242. And finally says, would you like to proceed with this option, or would you like to explore more options? Customer looks at it and says, this doesn't work for me. Is there any other option? And the agent considers this, goes back, and comes back with another option that says, that was somewhat different, but not different enough. Customer then says, how about an extended payment plan? So customer actually asks, like, basically, can I pay this over a longer period of time? So agent thinks about it, comes back with another option that actually gives a smaller, I think a larger loan amount, but smaller than the previous one, which ends up with a smaller but longer term of payment and a smaller monthly payment, and says, how does this sound, basically? And this seems to be a little more keeping with what the user actually asked for. The user responds with, this looks good to me, and I will take it. And then finally, the agent concludes by saying, great, I'm glad we could find a solution that works for you. Here's a summary of the extended payment plan, and the revised recurring payment amount is $69.85. The revised tenure of 11 installments, payment frequency bi-weekly, and revised total amount due $768. I will make a note of this agreement in our system. You will receive a confirmation of this agreement in writing, along with payment details. Thank you for your cooperation. Have a great day, right? And so that concludes it. The customer seems to be happy, says, thank you. That's all we have today. So kind of like a back and forth, all within the guidelines. Luckily, this customer is not asking for anything too crazy, because if that was, there would be an escape hatch for this AI to basically say, sorry, I couldn't find anything. Let me connect you to a customer service representative, and go from there, which would be basically that human oversight, right? But in cases where we're following what I would call a within guideline use case, it's able to complete it all the way to updating the system of record, and then coming out and giving the update to the customer. Now, in this whole thing, in the implementation of it, by the way, they were using a multi-agent orchestration framework. This was using LangGraph, by the way, and each of there was an orchestration agent, and there was some simpler single task agent for doing things like recovery of data from their loan management system, adding data to the loan management system, finding out the best possible fit with the loan product. Think of these as individual mini agents that are highly constrained to only do that one, and the orchestrated agent is constrained to call the right agent at the right time, and all of this being within the guardrails. Right now, this is the accuracy was over 90% in the kind of scenarios that we just saw, which I would call as a straightforward scenario, and falls well below 50% in much more complex scenarios when the user is not asking for something straightforward. And those cases get routed to an agent, a human agent, right? And so the average of all of these is something like 85%, but that's kind of where that doesn't give you the full nuance of some places where you can actually get over 90%, and over 90% is good enough here, because if there was a mistake, and by the way, this is caught in what's called the human oversight at the end, because even after the system of record is updated, there is a human that is reviewing all of these to make sure that these are consistent with the policies of the company. And there, in those cases that fail that test, they're able to revert it, send a notice back to the customer saying this was incorrectly done. We need to re-look at this loan, and sorry, we're not able to make this for you. So they have a way to revert those kind of like situations where the AI actually made a mistake, because the alternative, which is to require a human in the loop for every single case reviewing it, is unhelpful and causes more time, right? The idea of having an agent saves a lot of time if it was able to do, in the high 90s in accuracy, and later you find and fix the mistakes that you did. rather than require a human to, look at something that is 90%, 95% accurate. Most likely the human is going to find it difficult to work with something 95% accurate. And the simple reason is that if you end up seeing something like that, you will most likely be unable or inefficient in actually doing your oversight. It's sort of like a lesson learned from the self-driving case, by the way, from Google, where if you have a human holding the steering wheel in the car just as a fallback, and if the car is more than 90% accurate or 95% accurate, chances are the humans get distracted, right? So at that point, you'd rather go for a fully autonomous system and remove the human oversight completely, and then try to fix, build in safeguards so you kind of recover from mistakes. All right, I think that's kind of all I had. There were some things about future directions, but let me take a moment to look at the questions here. There was one question about where are the agents run? Are they isolated in a sandbox or something similar? These agents are running in the company's cloud environment, and they are comfortable with that in this particular case because that cloud environment has all of the data, and so the agent is being instrumented and run over there. So that's kind of how this is architected. So a few future directions, obviously low latency voice interactions is something that has to be done, and that's difficult simply because of that low latency. High accuracy in those 50% of the use case, in those 50% that, or in those cases that lead to less than 50% accuracy, right? Needing to know exactly which those are is a little bit tricky. And sometimes the first model doesn't, it's not evident until you're well into this agentic workflow that something is not right, and then you have to say stop and bring it in, which is also something that needs to be engineered properly. And in other words, reducing this overconfidence is a tricky thing, because the more you rely on the agent's reasoning versus guardrails, which is really what you want to do to have, confidence in AI making decisions. But the more you do that, the more you risk this overconfidence problem that the AI thinks it has the right solution when it doesn't actually do so. And of course, security against unintentional data leaks. This has not been well tested. There are lots of cases where people who know they are interacting with AI can try to sabotage and induce the AI to give you information that it's not supposed to, either from their internal systems or from other parts of the company. And finally, the reducing multi-agent compounding error. So I briefly mentioned that this is a multi-agent framework where there's an orchestrator orchestrating multiple single agents. Now, the compounding error is simply that, every time you use an agent with a language model powering it, there is a 90% accuracy or 95% accuracy in every step. If you have a sequence of 5 steps, each of those at 90%, you're quickly down to a 60% accuracy in the overall thing. So reducing that error means that each of these simple agents must be simple enough that they're extremely accurate and do that in a highly repeatable way, so that your complex system is also highly predictable. Right? The alternative would be a single expert agent that kind of knows and understands and has been trained for an end-to-end workflow, and that it understands, conversations, it understands loan systems, it understands document updates, and it understands communication from the company to the outside. Now, that's a lot more difficult, and it requires a lot more either reinforcement or other types of fine-tuning. And most companies prefer having multiple single agents that are orchestrated, and that ends up being more observable, more deterministic, and more predictable. And so for those reasons, that's the direction in which the industry is going in most of these enterprise use cases. All right, that concludes it with 5 minutes to spare. So if there's any other questions, I'm happy to take them now. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. If not, let's conclude it here. It's been great talking to you. If you have any other questions, reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, or if I'm connected to you already, send me a note by email. I love talking about this topic. This is something that I think we're going to see a ton of evolution in the next year. I think if we have the same talk this time next year, we're going to see a lot different in terms of what outcomes are, what technologies are, and just the volume and scale of the enterprises that are using these.
Sanjay, I got a quick question, just out of curiosity, your thoughts on most of the great innovation in tech, from my understanding and from what I've seen in my life, is finance, right? When do you think you'll come to a place where an AI agent will be able to execute, say, a trade based on market data? And is that foreseeable in the next 2 years, 5 years, 18 months, from what you just showed us today? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, just so I understand, when do you think we will see an agent doing what exactly?
Like a Bloomberg terminal, finance trading. Taking information, understanding copper prices, and then saying, isolate and go get me the stocks that are doing X, Y, and Z. Yeah.
I see. I don't know. I think that is my suspicion is that it's highly risky, and then for that reason, I think we will not be automating that, except, like I think Arun said before, maybe there's the first step of that is to do it in low risk areas, maybe small trades or something that is constrained, that the losses can be constrained. But my gut instinct is that we're not going to see highly automated large trading. Well, we do see automated trading, but that's different from AI-based trading, right? Automated in the sense that the decisions are algorithmically determined, and that is happening today. But decisions being language model or AI determined, I think that is not even 12 or 18 months. My suspicion is that is years away, just because the way we just don't know how well these AI are going to be making conclusions that compared to what a real trader would do.
Thank you. And with great presentation. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you. And if there's no other questions, let's conclude this. Thank you, May, and thank you for all the Xooglers who attended.
Thanks, Sanjay.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.